Lingua Brutalica is a podcast that uses ethnographic interviews to study language use in the extreme metal community. We are studying a music scene known for its love of themes and topics generally considered offensive, and it is likely that some episodes will touch on topics or opinions some listeners may find tasteless or ethically problematic. Ethnographic researchers aim to adopt the interviewee's point of view so that we can draw out and study the attitudes, beliefs, and practices that are important to them. We want to make it clear that in presenting these conversations here, we do not endorse any of their content. Our aim is to explore the thought processes behind language use in this long-running, international, and yet understudied scene. Hey everyone, welcome back to Lingua Brutalica with me, Jess Crook, and my co-host Wes Robertson.
Hello.
Today we're joined by Katie Davies of Pupil Slicer. Thanks for chatting to us, and how you doing?
Not too bad, not too bad. Been very busy. We just finished festival season, so finally good to be home. It's like a 3-day bank holiday weekend, so it's very much needed.
Absolutely.
But it's not really quiet because I'm in the middle of writing the next album as well, because we're going in the studio in like 4 weeks for that. So we'll finish that.
Yeah,
So
it was
very busy.
You were just on tour around most of Europe, right? Is that correct?
We didn't do it. We only went to Prague
Okay.
for Assault.
Oh, nice.
The rest was in the UK.
Okay. So if somebody had never heard Pupil Slicer's music before, so obviously not the people that came to the shows, how would you describe it to them? Is there a genre you'd fit under, or kind of what would be a general, assuming they have some kind of background in metal?
It is quite hard to pin on it. I think the majority mathcore influences, so like Dillinger Escape Plan and Converge and Botch. There's a bit of sort of death metal riffage in there. There's a bit of post metal. There's a bit of shoegaze. It's quite a wide spectrum. So maybe just like post metal / mathcore.
What kind of attracted you to the style? Did you begin by listening to mathcore?
The first thing I heard was Death Heaven. So the post black metal was where I got in, and then for some reason someone said, "If you like that, try this," and sent me Jane Doe.
Okay.
And so yeah, it was sort of like mathcore and post black metal where I came in, and they've been my favorite like subgenre since then. So sort of comes through in the music I write.
Was there anything in particular that really drew you to those specific genres?
For the post black metal, I just listened to Sunbather without really knowing what it was going to be like. I'd heard people say it was sort of similar to Godspeed You, Black Emperor, and like post rock, which I was into at the time. So, and then I got to like the song Vertigo in the album, and I was like, oh yes, it's a bop. It's got all the nice bits, and then that's sort of what broke the thing of, because the screaming's so low in the mix on that album. I was like, oh, it's actually quite a nice sort of just textural element. And then that sort of let me get over being like, oh, why are these people shouting? And then Jane Doe was just like, once that was unlocked, everything was like, oh my god, this is amazing. So like just the intensity of like mathcore, and like, because I'd heard a couple of Dillinger Escape Plan songs before, didn't like the screaming, but I thought the instrumentation was cool. So then once I got past the block of being like, oh, why are they screaming? I was like, oh, actually, this is amazing. So I think it was just the first things I got into, and then nothing else really scratched that. Nothing else like was as intense as like the hardcore punk attitude of like mathcore bands, because you get like heavier, you go like more brutal with like death metal, or you can go like riffier, but I just liked the sheer just intentionally disorientating elements of the mathcore.
So were the lyrics initially for you, or the singing initially for you, just kind of that texture, or were you interested in kind of what they were saying and the content of the screams once you got past the screaming early on?
In terms of listening to other people's, or mine?
In terms of other people's, like before you started being a vocalist yourself, did you pay attention to much what was being screamed?
It's a mixed bag. A lot of the time I didn't. But then for my favorite bands, I would look up the songs and I'd be like, oh, these are fantastic, and I'd learn the words. And those bands like Converge and Death Heaven have quite like emotional lyrics, but then Dinner Escape Plan sort of just play words that sound good. Or at least as far as I know, there's more depth to it, but a lot of the earlier stuff is just sort of, it doesn't seem like there's as much depth to it, but it's still it's finding the stuff that sounds good in the context of the song. And then when I got into like Black Dahlia Murder, Trevor's just fantastic for writing stuff that's like entertaining to read, sounds fantastic in its placement, and is delivered really well. So it's got like everything ticks. So it was a mixed bag. I think there are definitely bands where I'm like, oh yeah, that's fun. Like Mouth Breathers' first two EPs, like I know those vocals aren't delivered in a proper way, and they had to stop doing them because they were trying to stroke. But the delivery on that is fantastic. There's a lot of stuff where specifically the vocals draws me to it. But then at the same time, I'm like weird. I don't really like sort of Whitechapel-y, gingery, sort of really low deathcore vocals because they just don't do anything for me. So I think I'm quite picky with I think what I'm into.
So was there anything about like the lyrical content that stuck out to you as like, oh, like this is like, you know, this makes for good, better lyrics?
I think there's multiple approaches you can take to it. I like Death Heaven sort of more vague and like clearly emotional in the delivery, but the lyrics quite vague, and you can sort of attach whatever meaning you want to them. And then Converge is very raw and like straight to the point about, but it's still like, I think one of my favorite parts is you can draw your own meanings from the lyrics regardless of what the artist intended it to be about. And then like Nine Inch Nails is another example where it's like incredibly raw and direct, but because of that you can just straight away connect with the emotion there behind the lyrics and connect it to something in your life. So yeah, I think I like where there's room to sort of add your own stuff, but then that you know the artist's intention doesn't have to be what people are getting out of it. I think you need to leave room when writing for people to get what they want out of what you've written.
So I mean, you mentioned like bands like Black Dahlia Murder, and Trevor's lyrics, who I've been a huge fan for a long time of the way that kind of he approaches as well. But what elevates that to kind of the level of being good metal lyrics versus, you know, I mean, we've all heard a metal song that's about horror and gore, which is just kind of like gross or just like, you know, cringy. What takes it up to that level where it becomes something like, oh, this is enjoyable to read despite being horrific, in the way that kind of Black Dahlia does?
I think it's having a good balance with the metal lyrics of like campy, over the top. Like you've got to go properly over the top and still retain like a sense of humor about doing it. And just make it an entertaining thing to read. You've used words like carcass, like just going through a dictionary and finding funny words you've never heard that you have to go look up. And I think it is originality in like approaching things like Cat Decapitation have their whole gimmick of like swapping the places of humans and animals and stuff like that, but like finding something that makes it not just the same bog standard stuff of like, oh, I'm killing some people or whatever. I mean, I don't really write lyrics like that anyway. But the metal lyrics, yeah, there's definitely you need to have just have fun with it. I think you can have bands which don't have enough fun. Like when you're doing the really gory lyrics, if you don't do it with like a sense of fun to it, it's like just a bit boring. Then there's that, I can't remember the name of it, but there's like the band that's just like bass and drums.
Lightning
That's like
bolt.
really not lightning bolt, no, like a really horrific sounding sort of brutal
Oh,
death project. And it's like called like something raping the child or something. I can't remember. That might not be it, but that might be a song title. But it's just like horrific, horrible lyrics and like the worst thing you've ever heard. And it sounds like funny at first because the vocal delivery is like snorting and stuff. And then you read the lyrics, it's like the most horrific thing ever. And I think that's another approach to it, is you take it ultra seriously and write the most horrific thing you've ever heard. And then everyone's like, I never want to listen to that again. Similar to like, it's like the requiem of a dream of like lyric writing. And like, oh, great art. I'm never watching that again.
Sure,
I'm never
sure.
listening to that again. It's too disturbing and horrible. So I think you've got to be extreme in one way. You make it really silly and fun. You make it really serious and horrible and like just nauseating, and you can't just be middle of the road and be like, and then someone stabbed someone and there were blood.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is like striking that balance then like what you think kind of defines metal? Like, you know, if you were going to try and like pin down the genre and how it compares with other genres, like, you know, let's say like pop, rock, rap, hip hop.
I don't know, because that's pigeonholing every metal band into needing to write gory lyrics, because like that's only really in the sort of death metal sort of section, and even there in the death metal world, there's bands not doing that. And then you look at like post metal lyrics or sort of like mathcore bands all do their own thing, the more lean to the punky political side of things. And grindcore bands have like a whole array of like going from political to like you have your concepts albums, like you have Vector, like thrash metal. They're not writing about that. Heavy metal. That'd be quite funny to have a thrash metal writing about sort of gory stuff. But yeah, so I don't think, I think whatever you're doing in whatever genre, you need to commit to what you're doing. Like Vector fully commit to here's a like ridiculous sci-fi adventure. Like Between the Buried and Me spend like ages writing these like ridiculous concept albums with like loads of callbacks. So yeah, I think you just need to have faith in what you're doing, fully commit to it. Because I didn't have a lot of faith in what I was doing on the album. There's some parts which I don't like as much as others, because I was just sort of writing it to fill out space in the songs instead of really thinking about what I was writing. But at the same time, some of the best lyrics are just like, you're just like singing words along to what you've written, and you find words that sound good in certain places and make sentences out of them. And then you're like, I don't know what this means. And then later on, you come back and be like, oh, subconsciously, I must have like thought this, and it's actually quite a good lyric. Yeah.
Do you think there is like, I mean, you're right about, you know, the different genres. Thrash for certainly doesn't have the gore stuff as much, etc. But is there like a running undercurrent of some kind of style to metal that would be, say, do you think you could tell a metal band's lyrics, an extreme metal band's lyrics, from a non-extreme metal band's lyrics if you compared them, say, with 75% or so accuracy? Is there kind of a metal feel to the way lyrics are conducted in the genre, or are we at a point where everything goes? Like,
that's a good question. I think you'd have trouble with like, yeah, I think separating it from like rock would be all right. And but I think when you get to punk, there's enough political extreme metal bands that you'd have trouble telling the difference between punk and metal lyrics. I think there's definitely like metal goes off into more of the sort of fantastical side of things, but I think there are enough metal bands that just do straight up like political punky lyrics, and then there's sort of just that attitude of rebellion to it as a subgenre. Overall, like it's meant to. So a lot of metal bands would probably go for the angle of it's meant to shock, and then at the same time, it's like they're treating it like making a horror movie in an audio form. But then you think of that, and then you go, well, that's going to cross over into a lot of like industrial music and sort of even like industrial rap projects that are coming up now with like extremely metal lyrics and stuff. There is a lot of, I think there's a lot of crossover. Maybe in the like 80s and 90s you would have been able to tell them apart a lot easier because everyone was prescribing more to the genres that would, because the genres were just being created. There was so much room, you didn't really need to experiment much past that because everything you were doing was new. And now there's so much blending of the genres that it's quite hard to, I don't think I'd be able to pick apart everything with that much accuracy because it depends what you're comparing it to. There's so much crossover in the different subgenres.
And so you mentioned earlier, like, you know, your relationship to your lyrics that you've written, you know, off the album and stuff. So I suppose, like, to start getting into that, like, when did you first start writing lyrics?
Probably it was for the split prior to the album, because our old vocalist wrote the first EP. I did a bit on the first EP, but he wanted it to be very carcassy and sort of just silly gore grind lyrics, which was fun for a bit, and then we did the song after that, and then the split was sort of, he wrote one of the songs and I wrote the other one, but they were very much written as like placeholder sort of lyrics so I could perform the song live, and they're just silly gory things. And then I got to the album and I was like, well, I can just write about anything I want. Then I was like, well, I'm just gonna write sort of, and that was about when I started coming out as trans. So I was like, well, I'm gonna write stuff about that vaguely, and then compare that and like sort of make it about more vague and more about any kind of struggles people have. And then I ended up just sort of, I got more confident as I went on with the album writing the lyrics. So I think the lyrics get better the further through the process I was when I wrote them. But it seems to have worked. We get a lot of messages from people saying they really connect to the lyrics and it helped them through hard times, whether it be them being marginalised or like going through the loss of a loved one or going through any kind of hard things. They find something to latch onto in the lyrics, which is really cool.
That actually segues really well into the question we're going to ask right before we get into some of the more specific choices you made in the lyrics, which is that, you know, historically, due to some of the, you know, carcassy gore stuff we've talked about, there's been arguments that metal lyrics like don't mean anything or they're just like a horror movie. But your lyrics obviously, you know, have a bit more of a personal background to them, singing about things that you've gone through, and we're just kind of wondering, was it tricky to switch kind of into that? Was it difficult to speak about like yourself and your you know what you've experienced in metal, or was that something you found that just became quite natural to the genre or the music that your band makes?
It was more tricky just feeling confident enough to talk about things. Yeah, I think it was a natural, like, because for the subject of what the lyrics can be in this sort of music, that's fine, because like there's a lot of personal and like political messages in the genre already. It's just having the confidence to really commit to it and make it specific enough with while keeping the vagueness that other people can use to connect to whatever they're going through.
Okay. So there was always an intent to leave even the like more personal stories open to some level of interpretation.
Yeah, because I was at the same time, I don't want to just be writing my life story out and putting that much of myself down. I put a lot of myself down on the paper, but yeah, I didn't want to make it too specific.
Well, yeah, leading into like more discussion of your lyrics, to start off, we did want to just chat about like writing lyrics for mathcore specifically, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, Wes, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the first person we've spoken to who writes for mathcore music. So
yeah.
yeah, we wanted to know like what it's like writing lyrics that fit into like mathcore music, just given that like, you know, the style is kind of known for the use of irregular time signatures, syncopations, tempo changes that kind of generate that complex and fluctuating rhythm. So yeah, is there anything that you have to kind of take into consideration that you think would be, I suppose, slightly different from the kind of process that other lyricists who are writing for, you know, other less technical genres might have to go through?
Yeah, it's really hard. You've got to, well, I play guitar as well, so I've got to figure out if there's a couple parts which I thought would be impossible to sing and play at the same time that I've managed to figure out since. But yeah, it's hard enough to sing and play in 4/4, let alone everything else. But because of that, I think the lyrics are very tied in very closely with the rhythms of the song, and the rhythms of the guitar part. So I think it just accentuates what's already there. There's definitely a different style of writing lyrics to if I was just writing without having to play at all, because then you could be a bit more freeform with where you're placing, whereas I have to be like, well, I can't start a word if there isn't a hit on the guitar, because that's going to be really horrible to try and hit and then say something, then hit the guitar again. Yeah, you've got to take all that into account, which makes it quite hard. That's the main consideration, just if it's playable. But I don't think that's a detriment to how the lyrics come out, because there are parts where I'm like, well, I don't think I'm going to be able to play this, but I'm going to record it like that anyway, and then see if I can figure it out, because it sounds good.
Do you have to go through any kind of like technical I suppose process whereby like, so other lyricists we've spoken to that are writing to more regular and predictable rhythms have said that they do like syllable counts and stuff like that to kind of make sure that the words that they're writing kind of fit to the music and stuff. Do you have to do anything like that to make sure it's going to fit? Loads
of counting, loads of like, it needs to be, the sentence needs to be like 4-syllable word, 2-syllable word, something 1 syllable, something 2 syllable to add up right. And feel right over it. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. There's definitely more, because all the songs are written before I start on the vocals, so that makes it easier to link them up. And sometimes you have to make concessions of like, well, I'm not going to be able to fit this in, and despite this being what I want the song to be about, I'll just miss out a word of the sentence and write it all down. So there's a lot of things on the lyric sheet where I formatted it all nicely, but that's not actually what's in the song, because I've just had to cut words. Because it's not going to line up.
It's actually what I was going to ask, like, is it even possible? Because we talked to people that write the lyrics and then write the music, and people that write the music and then the lyrics, and people that do kind of back and forth. But I'm wondering, have you ever been able to write the lyrics before the music, given how like the time signature issues that come up, or is it always after the music is written?
There's been parts where I'll write stuff, but then it has to be heavily adapted. So you can't get too attached to it as it is. Like that could go on the lyric sheet, but it's going to have to be chopped and changed in some way to fit the song.
Is that ever like really difficult? Like when you come up with a line that you really have you ever come up with a line that you really love and then find that it just does not fit anywhere signature wise?
Oh yeah, that's happened. That's happening at the moment because I'm writing the lyrics for the second album, and I'm like, oh my god, that's really good, but it just doesn't fit. But, it will still go on the lyric sheet because that's what Converge do. They just write lyrics. Like, have you seen the lyrics for Concubine by Converge? There's like 3 paragraphs of them, and then in the song he sings 1 sentence of it over and over. He's like, it fits better. It's like, what was the point of writing them all? But just, yeah, good enough.
Interesting. Okay, so the lyric sheet won't actually match the lyrics necessarily?
No, but it'll contain everything that was in the lyrics.
Okay.
But it might have more. Yeah.
So I guess in a way, like, is the full art of Pupil Slicer both audible and something that you have to read?
Yeah. Because there's stuff in the lyric sheet that isn't in the songs, but But I feel like the performances convey the meaning of whatever was on the lyric sheet, even if some of the words are missed out.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've never. I mean, that's metal not being audible is something we don't. Well, kind of. We talked to one band that does puns and stuff, so like you have to read the lyrics to see the kind of the spelling puns. But it's interesting, the idea that like this musical genre is in part performed through the written form, right?
Yeah, because lyrics are just poetry at the end of the day, anyway.
I mean, it kind of makes sense in metal anyway, right? Because like we already have this kind of common practice of people reading the lyrics kind of independently, almost of like listening to the music.
Yeah.
So, well, like speaking of having trouble fitting lyrics to a song, some of the songs of your first self-titled EP are some of the shortest that we've seen on this podcast. So most are about like 1 to 2 minutes long, but some are only like 30 seconds long. So yeah, obviously we said that you didn't write all the lyrics for this one, but is it generally just challenging to write lyrics when you have such kind of limited musical real estate? And do you think there's more pressure then to kind of select just the right words?
No, I think it's quite freeing because you can just have an idea, get the core concepts of it. Because I find it harder when I can find it harder with a lot of longer songs to then like, was there enough content in this idea for this song to fill out this much amount of song? And sometimes there just isn't, and you have to like scrap it and put that on a different song, or like, because you want every sentence to be in the song for a reason. Like, even if the reason is it sounds sick rhythmically here and doesn't mean much, you need, like, if it's not got a reason at some point, then it needs to go because it can be replaced by something better.
So, I mean, given that you say it's a little more difficult, why did you switch to longer songs for the album Mirrors? Because Mirrors, the songs are all about 3 minutes to 7 minutes long. There's none of the 2-minute songs or 3-second songs. Was it like a conscious decision that you're gonna like, all right, we're gonna make longer songs, or did it just kind of
Just
happen?
how they came out. I was just maturing as a songwriter as well, because on the first EP, I couldn't play guitar very well, and I didn't know how to write a song, and I didn't know how to join up different sections of songs. So I was like, well, I'll just make them 30-second song then, and I only have to have like 2 ideas in the song, and then it's done. Whereas as I got more confident about songwriting, I was like, wow, I've got all these like ideas in this key at this tempo that can connect up, and then and now I'm getting to the point with the second album where I'm like, oh, I need to start cutting some of these songs down because I think it goes on a bit long.
Okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
there's a different approach of, it's just getting more confident about, like, even on the album, on the first album, there's still so much packed into each of those songs. Like, there's very rarely a riff that happens like twice. So there's like 3 albums worth of riffs in one album. And I think I'm getting more confident being like, okay, if this riff's good enough, I can play it twice. That's the dream. That's right.
When I hear a good riff, I'm usually okay with it coming up at least 2 times. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. That was a lot of people. Well, some people really like that about our album. They're like, oh, it's great. It's just like every time you're like, wow, what an amazing riff. And then it's gone and it leaves you wanting more. And there's other people who are just like, I wanted to hear it again. I'm so upset.
Your band is also kind of one of the few bands that we've interviewed, despite that this is an extreme metal podcast, that has a lot of lyrics dealing with kind of violence and gore. Obviously, just even from the band's name, Pupil Slicer, what kind of drew your band to this sort of topic? I know it's changed a bit over time, and you mentioned changing singers, but I'd say as a whole, kind of violence is something that is a theme we see across most lyrics that have come out so far.
Well, on the first EP, it was just meant to be silly all kind of stuff that was over the top, and then I think using that as a vehicle on the album, it was more a way to convey emotional aspects, political issues, societal issues, personal issues, and then just make it all hyperbolic and take it to the extreme to make it more entertaining to read and listen to. So it's in keeping with the spirit a bit more of metal, whilst also touching on more sensitive topics through that lens.
Was that a discussion like that the band had as a whole? Like let's do it in this kind of way, or is it just sort of
No, I just write everything. So they find out what the lyrics are when I get in the studio and record them. And even then I don't like being watched when I'm recorded, so they hear it when we get the first mixes back.
Okay. So there's no like interband communication feedback on it. It's just all like this is
not on the lyrical content, no.
Okay.
There is more in the second, like our bassist is like sent over like lists of phrases and stuff that he thought were cool for like potential song names or things, and then from there I've like picked a couple of them and turned them into stuff in the song. So yes, there was a bit of that, but there wasn't really a back and forth of like, oh, do you think this use of this is good? It's just I've used it. You'll see it when the first album's done.
So yeah, talking briefly about the EP before we get more into the album, we were discussing before the interview that we think you have one of the most disturbing band names that we've featured so far, especially for those of us who don't like eye stuff. And to be fair, the band name works really well in setting up the expectations for the lyrical content of the EP, which features a lot of eye-related gore and violence in almost every song. So, for example, for those listening, the first track, Subterranean Suffocation, mentions simmering, slithering, the eyelid sewn. So you said that you wanted to do kind of like silly, gore, grindy stuff on the EP, but was there any particular reason for which you wanted to focus on violence to the eyes in particular?
Because we had a funny band name that it was about eyes.
It's a good way to sell it.
About as deep as it goes.
Why did you come up with an eye band name then? I guess
it was
the most horrible band name I could think of. It was easy as that. We were thinking of like lists of like funny names for bands, and then I came up with that one. I was like, that's too good not to use. It's great. It's horrible.
100%. Yeah.
All right, so imagine we're talking. No, imagine someone is listening to this podcast who knows nothing about metal, like I don't know, some kindly older person who's up till now like the hardest thing they've heard is the Beatles, right? And they hear you say, I chose the band name because it's the most horrible thing I could think of. How do you why does a metal band decide on a name that is the most horrible thing that they could think of? What makes a horrible name a good name?
Because no one's going to pay attention if you've got a mediocre metal band name. If you were called like Person Stabber, not less like, oh, it's all right, I guess. It's not like, it's not as visceral. It's not going to stick with people. Like I think we got a lot of gigs early on just because we had a funny name to put on the poster. And people are like, oh, what a horrible name. I need to see what this sounds like.
I would totally listen to Person Stabber. That's, I guess, ironically kind of amazing.
If that was the gimmick,
Good.
It's just so bland. It's like incredibly, amazingly bland in the genre.
It's very straight to the point. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, is there a little bit of like yeah, I guess it's not shocking for people that listen to metal, but is the desire to kind of like stand out immediately kind of part of what goes into writing metal lyrics in a way, do you think?
Yeah, I think that happens in every genre because there's just so much content. You need something to set you apart. You need a reason for people to care. Like one of the main things, I think I've heard before. I can't remember where from, but it's like, why should people care about your band? And then you have to be like, well, that's how you figure out how to make something people will care about. You're like, why would people care? Well, funny name. And then you're like, well, lyrics make them personal and like stuff that's not really being covered in the genre. Musically, take influences from like multiple sources that haven't really been put together before, and find your own niche doing that, because that's how you get an audience. Because if you do something someone else has done 1,000 times, you can be really good at it, but it's going to be a lot harder to be a melodic death metal band that sounds exactly like Black Dahlia Murder and not just be compared to that. And yeah, you have to find your niche, I think.
Well, yeah, in contrast to that first EP, the lyrics from your album release, Mirrors, definitely appear to be like more specific, vulnerable, and, you know, as you suggested earlier, more kind of personal accounts of like inner turmoil, you know, mental health struggles. Lyrics like tear apart, pray you seek, callous fucking memory, you're not me from Martyrs, false living, I'm scared that I'm just becoming neurotic, it's fucking over my life, fucking thought in my head as I'm pulling out the dull knife and stabbing spiders that crawl on my skin. And of course, the song title L'appel du vide, Call of the Void in English, if I'm not mistaken, refers to the psychological phenomenon that involves a sudden urge to jump or fall from a high place. So are we right to read these lyrics as, you know, this kind of personal exploration of mental suffering? You said before that you consider them certainly quite personal. So yeah, what's your kind of explanation for these kinds of lyrics?
Yeah, I figured if I wrote stuff that was more personal, dealing with that kind of stuff, you give a better performance, because I wanted to make. Because when it's just random gore grindy stuff, you can it's fun, but it's like, how do you get an emotional performance out of that? And I think an emotional element to music is something that's always important. Like, and even with like Black Dahlia Murder, like the emotion there is the fun of it, and you can hear Travis having the best time of his life recording those vocals. But if I'm like, oh, they're all right, then I'm not going to give the performance that's going to be like wild and over the top and really intense and fun. So I think I decided to just go another route of making stuff that was more intensely personal, and then that would get a better performance out in the studio. And it worked, I think.
Have you ever found cases where it might have like backfired in a way, and that we've talked to some artists that have done personal stories that eventually, like years and years later, they find they can't put themselves in that mindset again anymore, or perhaps even don't want to kind of revisit that? Is that a risk that comes with making the stories more personal than, you know, the zombie stabby slicey pupil kind of thing?
I think so, but at the same time, I've written them vague enough that they're not about specific things. And then at the same time, it's so technical playing the songs and singing them that it's quite hard to get emotionally connected to them whilst performing. And it's definitely a performance of looking emotional. Because I'm like, oh, I'm having to play this like ridiculous part and like sing this at the same time, and remember to be exactly on the mic, and then remember to like not just stand with your legs together. You've got to like have a wider stance on stage, and then you've got to remember to like interact with the crowd properly. And there's just so much going on in a live scenario. It's quite hard to like be like, this song's about this, I'm feeling this at the moment. It's more just a technical performance of everything. Yeah, I don't think that's an issue with my lyrics. I don't think I would come back to them and be like, oh, I don't connect to this anymore.
Okay. Well, one other change we noticed in your lyrics becoming more personal is a massive increase in the use of the word fuck. On your first EP, there was not any swearing at all. But on Mirrors, there were 13 instances of the word fuck or fucking across the album. What kind of do you think brought about this sudden uptake in the use of swearing, and particularly the use of the word fuck?
Angry. More angry. Angry lyrics. and listening to too much Nine Inch Nails.
But was the EP not angry?
I don't think it was. It's more storytelling. It was like narrated, like things happening, but I don't think it had an emotional attitude to it. It was like portraying events that were like dramatic and horrific, but it wasn't anger directed at anyone or anything. And then the album definitely is anger directed at specific people, specific things.
Well, it's interesting because like swearing is something that we talk about a lot on this podcast, because people seem to have very kind of polarizing views on it in metal, because just about everyone we've interviewed kind of swears in their everyday life. But a lot of people we've spoken to say that they tend to avoid swearing in their lyrics because, you know, despite recognize it as a common kind of metal trope, they think that it's, you know, maybe too common to like keep using. But on the other hand, we have also spoken to people who have expressed kind of similar views to you that, like, you know, well-placed swear word can convey some kind of important sense of like emotionality, right? So is that generally your view on swearing more broadly, or do you have a different perspective?
Yeah, I think I know I should try and swear less in real life because I do too much. But I think in lyrics, I don't want it to be in there for the sake of being in there. But sometimes it just sounds really good. It's a powerful word. It's powerful to use a swear word, and it like has a certain bite to it that you don't get from just saying another word that sounds similar in that same space. So it's either it sounds really good where it's placed, or it's needed for the emotional context to really come through powerfully. So I'm not really putting it in there just for the sake of putting it in there. It's either it sounds really good in this position, or it adds to the emotional context here.
Does swearing make the
So
lyrics?
if I can if there isn't a way to put it in there, I'm not going to do it. Like I'm not. I would rather they don't have swear words in because then it makes it easier for like radio play and stuff. So,
True.
but sometimes it's like, well, I'm not compromising the art for that sake. So,
does swearing make the lyrics to you though feel more like I guess not to go use the word personal too much, but like if there's swearing in it, does it feel more authentic rather than telling a story about, again, like, you know, kind of gore grind violence?
yeah, because it's a more personal delivery of the feeling of it's conveying the emotionals more, the emotional content more honestly, I think.
I think almost all of your songs, if not all, are written from the first person perspective. So wherein the singer is, you know, I or me telling the one telling the story. And in fact, I think 6 of the 7 songs from your eponymous EP and 10 of the 12 tracks off Mirrors are written primarily just in first person. So was this also kind of part of that process of delivering this kind of deeply personal and emotional performance?
I don't know if it was conscious. I just end up writing a lot of stuff with I and you and stuff if I'm talking about specific things from specific angles. And I've thought like, oh, is it too much to just do every song like that? So I am conscious of it and trying to think, well, does it have to be that way? Is that? But for a lot of stuff, it does make more sense in that context to have it coming from that perspective. But then on the second album, now I'm writing the lyrics. There's more. I've planned out the album more as a whole and like an arc of the story and the beginning and the end, and then like which parts are first person from which characters in the story. And I've gone a lot more in depth with the lyrics, but that's because the second album's being written from all the songs are done, then I write all the lyrics. Whereas the first album was like, oh, I finished the song, I need to write lyrics before practice in 2 weeks so we can play at this gig in 3 weeks. So the lyrics lyrics were like there are overarching themes on the album, but it wasn't written as a singular art piece.
Okay. I mean, we've talked about lyrics kind of being, personal on this new album, but when you use is I actually you, or is it a character that in some way relates to you?
Yeah, it's not me. It's a character.
Mm-hmm.
It's the protagonist is whoever the listener is, I think, or if the listener wants to put themselves in their shoe, or the listener wants to go, I relate to the protagonist of this song. And the I definitely switches perspective in different songs at different points in different songs to be different characters throughout the album.
Oh, so not within a song, but across tracks?
And within songs as well. Wounds has like multiple angles.
Okay.
And then we did that with Luke singing some of the vocals and then me singing the others.
Right. So how do you navigate between all of these different kind of perspectives, even within one song?
I usually just put it in quote lines in the lyrics sheet when it's a different perspective. It's not particularly hard to navigate. It's just there's different characters in this like story of the song.
When you bring another band member in to sing, do you explain kind of what's going on, or you just say, "Hey, you're saying these things"?
I think I did just say, "Hey, I'm set. This is the line," but then sometimes I think I did give more context. But yeah, most of the time it was just like, "Can you sing this bit?"
Okay.
Well, we can definitely see some of those like shifts in perspectives, like on a larger scale. One of the contrasts that we noticed, in looking at the lyrics, written from some of the songs in the EP, and the first album, is that the lyrics from the EP involve the person embodied in I and me, kind of committing violent acts, as suggested in lines like "I so eyes vision to the soul from death lust," and "I know in my heart that killing is wrong. Alas, my disease, my thirst, I cannot slate." And there are repeated references.
So silly. Completely forgot about them. I haven't sung any of those in like 7 years, 6 years.
Well, it's kind of interesting, when you look back, because a lot of the lines do kind of imply like committing acts or imply culpability in those acts, whereas like on Mirrors, there are several songs where it seems like some kind of unknown person addressed as you is the one performing violence that the singer, the protagonist, is kind of a victim of and is fighting back against. So just for an example, the line, "The work will never be done, finding new beings to corrupt and taking them down to your level of malignant rancor of martyrs," is immediately followed by a line, "Die narcissistic fucking waste, controlling every little thing I do." And in Panic Defense, you have lines like, "Can't say no, let me go, get away. In confidence, you let me in, made me pray," that seems to detail the narrator's assault murder. So what motivated you to kind of shift towards kind of detailing the scenes where the some of the perspectives involve the narrator taking the role of the victim rather than the perpetrator of violence?
Well, it's just more personal. It's about issues of the world, issues with abuse, and like being trans. Like Panic Defense is about panic defense, if you know what that means. Like where, so it's just talking about. It wouldn't be great to write an album about these issues and then put it from the perspective of people committing the bad things, but maybe that would be another way of doing it. It's just not the way I'd feel comfortable delivering it. Yeah, it's just like the perspective from which I exist and observe the things happening in the world, then projected onto a character, like a protagonist of the song, and then you hyperbolize everything going on. Well, some of it's hyperbole, Panic Defenses, and that's just like straight up. Some people kill people and then say, "Oh, they were gay, they were trans, so I killed them," and then they're like, "Oh, no problem." all good.
Mm.
And it's just what happens. It's the US legal system, sorry.
Yeah. So when you're using these U's, you definitely, and these I's, sometimes you definitely do have a specific person or group of people in mind that you are sometimes specifically critiquing and targeting. And
I just make it more obvious than in some songs than other songs, because some songs are more personal and I don't want to be as clear with who that's addressing and leave room for people to attach it to own things in their lives. But then with other songs like Panic Defense, I put Panic Defense in the title and the song's clearly about that, so it's very directed at like the US legal system and stuff like that. Yeah, there's a mix of that, but there's always in my mind something what there is. I know what the songs are about, but some of them I won't say as clearly as others because I want people to be able to add their own meanings in there.
So is the clarity of the title then in some ways a hint to readers or listeners about how much you're kind of willing to give away?
Maybe, yeah.
Okay. One thing we're also wondering is with this kind of this taking the perspective of an actor in these songs often. We noted a lot of tracks. There are 7 actually across 6 of the 12 songs in the album where you use rhetorical questions such as "What is this I'm seeing?" or "It couldn't get better from here, right?" Is there an effect that you aim for with these kind of questions, or just is it a natural consequence of using the first person?
I think the rhetorical questions are more a reflection of like an inner dialogue going on in the song, like different trains of thought within that perspective that makes up the primary perspective of the song.
Well, going back to something that you mentioned earlier, like, regarding using the quotes and stuff, we're just wondering, like, with that though, like, because it's something that you can see certainly on the lyric sheet, but not something that you can necessarily like perceive just by like listening to your vocal delivery. Is there any like potential then for the chance like that somebody will like kind of misinterpret the lyrics or like how the different kind of voices relate to each other?
No, because no one will know what I'm saying unless they read the lyric sheet.
Excellent answer.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
So, I guess we kind of mentioned this like the written lyrics being part of Pupil Slicer's art then. But would you say personally that you hope the people do go and read what you've written then? I mean, obviously, not like demand it, but is it something you hope they do, or have you had people come up and said, "Hey, I read the lyrics and I really connected with what you've written rather than what you've sung"?
I think if you're interested, read them. If not, then enjoy the songs, because I don't read like a majority of anything that I listen to, and I've got no idea what they're saying. I find it really hard to even like because I'm autistic. Like I like just watching like a film I have to watch it with subtitles. So if I'm listening to like a pop song, even though they're singing cleanly, I can't hear what they're saying. I can't work out the words. So for me, a majority of music is whatever meaning I prescribe to it, and then if I go and read the lyrics later on because I really like it and want to know what it's about, then I'll do that. So I think other people can do that if they want, but I feel like emotionally the performance on the album also conveys whatever it is I'm trying to convey. Either way, there's other people like, oh, it's such a great emotional delivery on the album. They haven't read the lyrics, but I'm like, oh, good, you got that out of it. So and then you just got the song titles to sort of go off, and then you can make up what you think the song's about or whatever words you can grasp out of it.
Oh, so you're very you give the listener a lot of freedom then in understanding the song in their own way.
Yeah.
Has anyone ever like kind of come up to you with like an interpretation of like songs or lyrics and stuff that you think is like way far afield of like what you kind of imagine the song to be about?
Not really. People are pretty bang on. People just turn up and be like, "Oh, is this song about this? I think it is," and I'll be like, "Yeah." Pretty much every time it's like, "Yeah, you got it."
Okay.
Now
Fair
don't
enough.
tell other people. You've got to work it out. They've got to work it out as well.
That actually, again, links to something. It's interesting. A lot of these comments you're making kind of link into the next question we had, because one thing we noted in lyrics in general is that your language use is pretty straightforward, which maybe helps with interpretation. Is then the majority of vocabulary are things we might see in everyday conversation. So, for instance, like the opening lines of Mirrors are more fun than television has my conflicted being, body and blood. I try to fake with earnest. It's never good enough, which, most English speakers are pretty, conversational terms. But you still, in some cases, use less common multisyllabic words like malignant rancor, renewed ardor, typhon of enmity. And so we're wondering, how do you decide when to use kind of the simpler terms that appear more commonly? And when do you decide to use kind of these bigger terms that we see? There's the metal stereotype of the huge, gigantic thesaurus words in the titles, puritanical, euphoric misanthropia kind of stuff. When do you try to strike a balance? Do you prefer the simpler words, or is there an effect you are aiming for by switching back and forth between them at sometimes?
I think there's just the issue of a lot of the parts of this music. There is no room for anything more than like 1 to 3 syllables in a word, because you can't fit it unless you stretch a word out over like 3 bars of the song. So there just isn't room for it. So, but I do think it conveys something a lot clearer using the more basic language. But then there is times where it's like, well, I've got this idea, but it sounds too straightforward, it's not elevated enough. Like if you were gonna say, like, instead of malignant rancor, you could be like, your bad attitude doesn't really like convey with the same like weight that you'd get from like malignant rancor, or like the typhoon of enmity. You could be like, I was upset. It's like, there are times where you're like, well, I've got the idea of what the lyrics should be here, but it needs to be elevated a bit. It needs more character to the way it's delivered to really make it stand out and like really convey the exact emotion, as opposed to just like a more basic interpretation. There's more depth to it then.
I mean, in some of those cases, it seems like it's kind of underselling the emotionality a bit if you were to write it using more kind of basic language, if you like. Like, I mean, I am upset versus like typhoon of enmity. I mean, the latter seems like it packs a more powerful emotional punch, right?
Yeah.
Is that kind of heaviness, that weightiness, to kind of borrow the terms that you had there, is that something you find is really effective for metal, or more broadly just for poetry, or more broadly than that, even just for conveying emotion in any context?
Yeah, I think everything. Like, you want to convey the emotion with words that most accurately meet what you think. Yeah, that's exactly what this emotion is. That's exactly what the meaning of this is. Instead of going for something that's like, well, it gets the idea across, but it doesn't have the depth to it, that it's not covering all the facets of the idea.
Could they work outside of metal and poetry though? Because, like, I mean, I certainly agree with the idea you're having, but when I've been upset, I've never said, like, in normal conversation, I'm feeling a typhoon of enmity at the moment. Like,
I guess in that situation, yeah. But in the terms, in like art, definitely. Like, and yeah, in terms of art, like in a film, a David Lynch film, someone could say that, and you'd be like, oh, great dialogue. But no one would ever say that.
What about like an Ed Sheeran song though? Could he say, like, I'm feeling a typhoon of enmity, and would it come off okay? Instead of, I've never listened to, I don't know his lyrics, but I think he says more like I am sad kind of thing, right?
I think it depends on the delivery. I think in pop music you do get songs where it's like phrases that wouldn't really typically be said. I think it's a different balance to strike there in pop, where you want stuff to be more as direct as possible, but then there'll be other times where you need stuff to convey the emotional stuff. So it's a different balance, but a similar balancing act.
Oh, okay. That I quite like that phrasing. That's very interesting.
Interesting. Well, yeah, regarding the multisyllabic words, we did notice that there's a particular kind of multisyllabic word that appears quite frequently in your lyrics, specifically those that end with shin, as in tion, like suffocation, termination, degradation, immolation, compulsion, prevention, inaction, discrimination, situation, affliction, generation, creation, annihilation, and dissociation. Are you aware of this pattern, first off?
No.
Do you think there's a reason for it?
Good.
Okay. Yeah.
Sounds good. It's really fun to go like annihilation. Like, it's fun having. It's a fun sound to make. A lot of it is like why you end up with lots of similar words is it's just finding stuff that sounds right.
Interesting. So there's definitely like big words that also fit the music that you're making, kind of.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, are there sounds that don't work? Like that you've tried to get in and just the sound just is a no-go?
Oh yeah. Yeah, you can write stuff and be like, that just doesn't sound good when it's. I've written loads like stuff for the second album where I wrote out loads of stuff, brainstormed some like great lyrics, thought they were fantastic, and just none of it sounds good put to music. It looks great on paper, but it just doesn't work as lyric.
Well, like, does it help out, like, the shin words, do they help out with the rhyming? Because, like, that's something that we also notice kind of appearing pretty consistently off, both albums. So, like, on Mirrors, you have bodies are piling up, ignorant to your next move, carcasses in Lost and Found without a beating heart to soothe. And in fact, I think every song of, both releases includes at least one instance of rhyme. Is that kind of what's happening there?
I don't know if I'm picking them specifically to make them rhyme, but like similar words, but I'm definitely intending to rhyme certain parts because it makes. I don't know. I think it gives more structure to the lyrics over something that's already quite loose in terms of structure and like things not repeating and stuff. So it's good to have some grounding in there to tie it all together.
Oh, interesting. So the rhyme kind of conflicts with what's going on in the music in a way?
It doesn't conflict it, but it helps strengthen where a musical phrase comes up twice and then you have the lyrics rhyme on those, and then it's clearer that it's recalling an idea or repeating something. So that there's more structure to what you're hearing and it's not complete chaos.
Okay. So without the kind of the rhyme in the songs you think would have less kind of a core, I guess, or like something holding them together?
Yeah, it's less cohesion to it all, I think, if that wasn't there. It's even if you can't understand the lyrics, you can still hear the sounds of the words, so you would be able to pick up on like the same sounds like rhyming at the end of things without knowing what the words are, because in an audio way, like just auditory, like they sound similar.
I'm gonna kind of apologize for this next question because it's so hypothetical that it's honestly just kind of dumb to even try asking, but bear with me. If you were in a completely different metal band that did have a more traditional structure, do you feel like that would give you the ability to rhyme less?
I don't know. I like rhyming anyway.
Okay.
It makes it easier to write lyrics because you can just like figure out what the next line is just by finding a word that sounds similar and then making a sentence to connect them up.
Okay, cool. Thank you for putting up with that question. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, like, I mean, speaking of other kind of like layers to your lyrics, we notice as well that a lot of the rhyme is paired with alliteration as well. And you can see this like most clearly on tracks like Subterranean Suffocation, which includes phrases like simmering, slithering, the eyelid sewn, bloodstained bone, mutilated muscle. Is again this something that you're including kind of intentionally or consciously? And if so, like what kind of effect do you reckon it adds to the overall feel of the lyrics?
I think that's another thing where even if you can't hear what the lyrics are saying, it makes for a more entertaining listen. It's something to latch onto, even if you don't know what the words are.
Okay. I guess the final sort of trend we noted in your lyrics, looking at them, is that you have a tendency towards an active present voice. So for On Mirrors, for instance, 10 of the 12 songs are in the present tense, with only Panic Defense and the closer Collective Unconscious referencing the past. And there's a lot of use of verbs in the ing form. 21 on Martyrs, as in striking skulls in perfect rhythm, Iker pooling in the drain, beating out a song to please him, innocence of the victim failing, and 82 uses of words ending in ing on the album as a whole. Do you know what might, I guess, what does this surprise you at all? And do you know what might draw you to this kind of present active tense in the way that you tell these stories?
I think it makes the songs more direct, and that's a very direct album. And then ing verbs is just, it's another thing that sounds good with the shun verbs.
Ing and shun?
Ing and shun, yeah, they go to.
So I suppose as a kind of like wrap up question, what would you say, or what would you say is like the ultimate kind of role of language and lyrics in Pupil Slicer's music? And I suppose what would you say is the role of language and lyrics in metal music more broadly beyond that?
For us, I think it's providing an emotional core to the music that you might get like some idea just musically, but really the emotional core of it's in the lyrics, and then that gives new context to all the rest of the instrumentation. Sort of elevates everything. That's the great in the sum of its parts, like reading the lyrics on their own or hearing an instrumental version of the song. It's the emotional context which then gives the instrumentation more weight, and I think on the whole across metal it's probably similar, like where you want the lyrics to be informing the tone and the meaning of the song, which then in turn sort of amplifies whatever's done instrumentally, and you want it all to be greater than the sum of its parts.
And is that how you feel kind of lyrics, the role of lyrics in metal in other bands as well? Or is Pupil Slicer kind of particular in that?
Well, in bands where it's less emotional in the lyrics, I still feel like they're providing the same service of adding to the rhythmic or just the timbre of the music to sort of add texture and then elevate as a whole. So like that's quite a basic answer when you boil it down to me being like, yeah, lyrics are there to make the song sound better.
And yet it's still a pretty unique perspective though, because I mean we have spoken to people who are just like lyrics are relatively just additional decoration, rather than kind of integral to the overall feel of the music and that kind of thing. So it's still a valid perspective, I guess, is the point of making.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it is a question, right? What would metal be without? I mean, the music obviously, as you said at the very beginning of this interview, at first you kind of don't even know what's saying. You need to get used to the screaming, but it is there, right? So what would metal be without words? I suppose is kind of the question.
I don't know. There are bands I like without vocals, but I think I tend to gravitate towards ones more with. I find it harder for instrumental bands to hold my attention for as long as something where there's some voice in there to sort of add additional context and mix things up. Because that's the thing, you can give multiple different styles of vocal delivery across an album, but if there's no vocals there and the instrumentation's fairly similar throughout the album, it's a lot less dynamic. So it is like amplifying the album in that sense as well.
Awesome. Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot for
Nothing
chatting
against
to us.
instrumental bands. It's very hard to love being an instrumental band.
Yeah.
It's really hard, but that's another track. You have to make all the tracks more dynamic if you're doing that, because you have to compensate for the fact that you haven't got an additional layer in there that's doing that for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
No, for sure. We don't want. We're not anti.
No,
it's not like
not.
An anti-animals as leaders podcast or anything like that.
No.
Fuck Russian circles, Brutalica.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. It's I had it was during a very, very busy time and stuff like that. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
And you mentioned
Thanks for having me.
Oh yeah, of course. You mentioned that you're working on a new album. Is that something that people can look forward to soon, or is it something in development?
Probably like mid next year. So we're going in the studio in like a month, and then we've got to finish up then it's music videos, making the packaging, get merch ready, planning out tours. So it's probably not until like mid next year, but it's on the way.
Okay, sweet. And so until then, where's the best place for listeners to kind of keep up with what Pupil Slicer is releasing, any upcoming tours, that kind of thing?
You can get your one-stop shop for all Pupil Slicer goodness at pupilslicer.co.uk, which should link to merch, music, videos, all the other socials. But if you just want to go to the socials, it's just Pupil Slicer, one word, on everything: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Not on TikTok. Maybe we can make one, but I don't know what I'd put on it.
Sweet. All right, we'll link that in the description.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Yeah. Have a lovely Sunday. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Lingua Brutalica. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stay tuned for our next episode. Before we leave, we just wanted to acknowledge that this podcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging.